Welcome, everyone, to what's sure to be a fantastic episode of What Would You Change? We are the Super Monkey Fighters. I'm Loki here with Monkey Feathers and Papa Nugget. And I say this one's going to be fantastic because we are reviewing the 2020 film Nomadland, directed by Chloé Zhao, written by Jessica Bruder, is the book it was based off of, and Chloé Zhao wrote the screenplay. It stars Frances McDormand, David Strathairn, Linda May. I don't think anyone else in this was actually an actor. If you don't know what this movie is, it's the story of a woman in her 60s who, after losing everything in the Great Recession, embarks on a journey through the American West, living as a van-dwelling modern-day nomad. The way I would summarize this film is Frances McDormand lives in a van. And that's it. Anyway, we got to go through likes. I don't really have many because there's things that I almost liked about this movie. I almost really liked the cinematography, but then they cut the shots all short. Instead of lingering on these amazing vistas, it was montaged, and it was just, I was like, oh, I want to just enjoy this shot. This looks really cool. And it just didn't really stick around, and so it just kind of became nothing.
Well, and that's what it felt like, right? It just felt like a series of now this is happening, now this is happening, just a timeline, a sequence of events. That's all the movie was.
Yeah.
It felt like a day in the life of a nomad, played by Frances McDormand.
It's a year in the life.
Yeah. And I did like the cinematography. I did like a lot of the beautiful landscape shots, or just like one shot that really did stand out was like it was a shot of the water, and then it was like another shot of the water, and then she walks through it. I was like, that's actually like really beautiful. So I can see why you would like it, but then hate it because it's not held longer to fully appreciate what you're seeing.
That's about the only thing this film had going for it, and they just didn't do it enough. And so the second you're kind of interested in the shot, it cuts to something else, and you're just like, oh, okay.
And it's also interesting to see that they really didn't film anything in broad daylight. It was usually like an early morning shot where the sun might be cresting, or an evening shot, or there was overcast from clouds or whatever. It was never 2:00 in the afternoon, here's a shot. And I found that was an interesting choice for them to have accomplished or achieved while filming this.
Honestly, now that I think about that, I'm wondering if they were trying to use the lighting to highlight almost how she was feeling at times. Because I'm trying to remember back to specific scenes, and it seemed like the happier scenes were the brighter scenes, and the more reflective and inner ones were kind of the overcast, and
it also felt like
she was struggling.
Instead of actually doing color grading on it, they just shifted the white balance between yellow and blue. So it's like, oh, this is kind of melancholy or winter or evening. Let's just shift it to the blue a little bit rather than actually do any color grading on it. So it was potential, but didn't really go to anything. It just, nothing about it stood out and was memorable. It was just like, oh, this is kind of okay. And maybe part of that is I've spent a lot of my life in very similar landscapes. So I don't necessarily see the beauty of the landscape of the deserts because it's just natural. It's normal. It doesn't stand out to me the way that like forests do. And those were some of the shots that I really did like when she was in the big pine forests and looking at those. Like anywhere that was green and lush, that stood out more than anything else to me.
I think that also helps to understand that there's more color to it as well. Because when you're traveling on the road and it's just snowing outside or raining, or she's at a gas station, it's not an exciting scene to witness. Whereas when she's walking through a forest or a river or something that has more beauty to it. Because even I don't even know where this was at, but the rock formation thing, and she starts running through randomly. Okay, it just is. But when you do get the more landscape, the more color to the scene, it does create more interest, I think, anyway.
That's a phrase I would use to summarize this movie entirely. It is. That's it. Like, I mean, there's no character journeys throughout any of this. It's just these people are.
Yeah.
And there's no lessons that are learned. There's no journey that they go through. There's barely interactions between most people. Like, they're all kind of at arm's length.
What I'll kind of say is there's a little bit of like character journeys through, I don't know her name in the movie, but Frances McDormand's character and
Fern.
And then the guy that she's kind of interested in, but kind of not interested in, but he's more interested in her.
David Strathairn.
They kind of have a character journey because she's able to let go of her past and he's able to build a relationship with his son again and his grandchild. So I would say that there's kind of a character journey, but it's not hammered in your head.
I wouldn't call that a journey. I would call that an encounter.
Oh, fine,
that's the thing is,
but that's my point though, is like it's kind of there, but it's just not fully fleshed out as you would normally do.
There's no like start and finish to any of it. It's just like it just kind of drifts from one thing to the next. Nothing really concludes or wraps up or
there's no real conflict between anyone. I mean, there's things that happen, but they're not conflict. Like, she goes to see her sister, whose husband and friends are all in the real estate game, and she's kind of opposed to that lifestyle in general, but also because of her journey through the recession and how she lost her house. But there's like 2 lines of dialogue, and then people are just like, okay, and then that's it.
Yeah.
And,
there's not the conflict
and there's not actual like.
Yeah.
There's nothing, the characters don't gain anything from that. It's just mild inconvenience and then they move on. Like, and that's kind of how, I mean, even he makes up with his son, but were they estranged or were they not? Like, it seems like that all
seemed like their relationship was fine. Like, it didn't seem like it was bad.
It just seemed distant.
It approached like it seemed like it was. Yeah. Like,
that's how it came off.
Nothing had happened that they just kind of grew apart and now they're not. Like, and now that they're together, everything's okay. One thing I will say that I did actually appreciate when she's up there staying with them, the kind of love interest and his family.
Yeah, kind of love it.
They all kind of ask her to stay, and she never really answers. Right? They all just kind of, oh, we like you around, and you can stay, and we've got a guest house, and blah blah blah. She has the most realistic panic attack that I've ever seen, and just like up and leaves. Like, she's sitting there in bed, just can't sleep, and just kind of like, and then goes out to her van and falls asleep. Like, that's, to me, that's kind of how a panic attack looks from the outside. Like, she's freaking out.
Well, that's where she feels safe.
All you see is she
home.
just moves to wherever she's safe, and then there you go. And like, it's not this complete and utter break. Like, she's having a breakdown within that moment, but you don't see it because you're trying to hide it all. You're trying to keep it all together. And so I did actually appreciate that.
You know, aside from, of course, what I mentioned about liking the cinematography of this, I did actually like the music. I felt...
When it finally showed up.
Well, when it finally showed up. But it's one of those, it wasn't like wall-to-wall music that some movies do have. It was more... And I think that's actually what helped tie in with the cinematography, is because usually the music would kick in with like the beautiful landscape shots and music and I guess potentially montages. But it was, I felt that it was, simply put, I felt it was very pretty, and it helped to tie in with the beauty of being a nomad, to where you are just out in nature and enjoying what you are witnessing. And so I did actually like the music for this.
I feel like going into it, I really wanted to like this movie, just from the concept and all of that. But I was sadly disappointed with what I saw. It did not meet my expectations. And I had broad expectations. Like, I didn't expect anything specific. Just, I thought it would be interesting.
You had big broad expectations. And even then, it didn't meet those.
Yeah, or anywhere under the umbrella. So, like, I really wanted to like this one, but...
Well, I agree. Like, you don't have to have big explosions all the time to make an interesting movie, but you do kind of have, like, character interactions and dialogue and, I'm sorry that Frances McDormand cleaning porta potties at a campsite is not entertaining to me. Having done menial jobs in the past, I don't want to watch menial jobs. Like, that's the thing is, I
don't know. And if we want to transition into dislikes, like, this is a topic I can transition into. So one of the biggest issues that I've had kind of on the same topic is, like, I don't feel like I really learned much about her as a character. Like, it starts out with, there's some little tidbits that, like, she lost her husband and she's kind of moving on, but they didn't really spell any of that out, which would probably be fine. But then it's just like her life as a nomad and then the end. And there was no resolution. Like it just, stuff kept going. It didn't, we don't know. But we didn't learn anything about her the entire time other than just watching her live as a nomad. And there wasn't, like, the lack of dialogue. Like, she didn't even, like, explain her past. I mean, we learned a little bit about her family, but, like, we didn't really learn who she was. We kind of did.
Did we really learn anything about her family, though?
We
learned about how they interacted and how
you learned about her sister a little bit. Like, yeah.
But I guess not in a positive way.
I forgot that part completely. Because I know that she met up with her sister, but I don't...
Yeah, there's the sister...
Yeah, I don't remember.
That's about the only glimpse into her character that you get. There's 2 times it happens. She's talking about her husband and when he's on the morphine drip and how she wanted to just maybe end it sooner for him so he didn't suffer. And her friend says, well, maybe he wanted to stay with you as long as he could. Like, that's it. And then talking to her sister says, you left as soon as you could and you just kept going and you left a hole behind. Like, you were the person who could really see me as a person, but then you left. And that's like,
did we even know the timeline of, like, when her husband died versus, like, when the town collapsed? Like, did she live there by herself for, like, a decade? Like, longer? Like we don't.
I think they said 2011 was when the town closed down.
Yeah,
the recession was 2008 is when it started, and so it's there's no time frame of how long. Like, she goes to her old house and it's still sitting there empty. It's like, okay, why don't you just stay at the house? Like,
that's something that is so confusing to me.
Was it foreclosed on? Like, I don't know.
The company owned it and they just kicked everybody out.
I don't know.
That's what's confusing to me about the whole situation is, like, the beginning text that pops up for the film that says, oh, and now this zip code is discontinued. Can you actually discontinue a whole town?
That too. Okay. I'm sure you can. I mean, it's up to the post office.
If there's nobody who lives there, they're not going to have a postcode for it.
But they kicked everyone out.
If they don't have a post office covering the region, then they would probably discontinue it, I would imagine.
But it's just, there were people that lived there, and then the mine closed down, and then they kicked everyone out, and then, yeah, sure, you have a discontinued zip code. But can you literally just kick everyone out of a livable area and just say, like, well, this whole town's foreclosed?
Well, that's what we don't understand. Like Loki said, was it all company-owned houses? Because, if it went out of business, everyone would get kicked out.
See, and that's the thing.
Well, then wouldn't the government step in and say, well...
No.
Because I'm just thinking, because it's usable land, wouldn't the government just step in and just rebuild over it?
No. Like, if people aren't going to live there, they're not going to live there. So, but that's the thing. That's the problem with this movie is there's a bunch of stories here that you kind of see a little bit of, and then you just walk away from. Like, what happened to the town? What happened to all the people there? What about the people that she ran into at the sporting goods store that offer a place to stay that she had,
but the storage unit's still there and still being
The storage
ran.
unit's still there. and paid for. Everybody's got cell phones that they're covering the bills on. Like, there's all of these little stories that could tell that you could maybe be entertained by or learn something from or do anything with. But
Or gain a complete picture by.
The second they poke their head up, they're gone. And you're just like, okay.
And that all mirrors like her as a character. Like, she's very short with people. Like she doesn't talk a lot. She'll give like one word answers, like to the point. She hides from things. Like, which is fine, but it's just not that interesting of a character.
Well, and it's just, there's nothing there to tell. That's the thing. Is like, I mean, even when you see her by herself and she looks melancholy. Okay, I get it that the life you live is not great, but there's people giving you options to not live the life that you live. You're making this choice to do this. Like, your sister said, "Hey, come stay with us."
Well, and there's the other family in the beginning too, where they're like, "You doing okay? Like, you can always come.
You doing okay, and you can go
stay with us." Like, there's people that care about her.
Yeah, but it wasn't like the big epiphany where it's like, no, the call of the road is what I need. That's where I'm truly happy.
Yeah.
She didn't seem happy about being on the road. She just didn't seem like this movie to me was just depression, and this is what depression is.
Yeah, and the entire movie is her running. Like she's running, in my opinion, like she's running from the town. She's running from the death of her husband. She's running from her family. She's running from a possible love interest. Like,
there's the literal running, as I mentioned, from like when they were in that rock formation. I had no idea the purpose of this because I thought for a moment, wait, is she getting like Alzheimer's or however you want to say it?
Again,
because she was just running through it and then looking around, and I'm like, are you trying to find something? But you continue running. But did she get lost? Because she specifically started like running away. So it was the most confusing scene. And then it ends and I'm thinking, what the point? Like, what the hell was the point of this?
It's like she was like, that's being a child.
Every interaction in the movie.
What it seemed like to me. Like she was having a childlike moment running through the hoodoos.
Fine. It's a childlike moment, but it's still so confusing. And
in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really fit in anywhere or resolve anything or move the story forward.
She's camping on the side of the road where it's when her love interest leaves. She's still there, and then, quarter mile down the road, there's a bunch of dudes playing guitar and drinking. Like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, what does anything in this have to do with anything? Like, the second something comes up that you think is going to be something,
it cuts to something else.
And I get that this is kind of the point of the nomadic life, but I think a lot of this movie was just a swing and a miss. Like, the two real actors and then a bunch of like actual people doesn't mix. That was my biggest dislike, was trying to see real people be real people next to actors, because it didn't jive to me. From the get-go, the first interaction that she has with the storage unit guy, she's standing there acting, and he's just like, okay, guess we'll see you later.
He was acting that perfectly. That was totally natural. It's exactly what.
I'm only laughing because you're just like, okay, thanks.
That's what it was.
That's why it's just funny, just how that came across.
Every time there was something that could kind of go somewhere, the other people didn't know what to do with it. When she's playing with the campground, and they're picking up the garbage and they pick up the shirt, right? She's improv. Hey, we're gonna do this goofy thing, and she just runs away. I'm like, all right, this didn't turn into anything because the other actor didn't know what to do with it, and just was like, oh, this is a gross shirt. I'm gonna just move away from it. Like, and so it was just a lot of these random interactions that just popped up, and it was like, it's kind of like watching a mime in a crowd of people who doesn't want to be involved with a mime. That's really what it was. There's a person here performing and nobody else really wants to do it. And so it's like, just walk over here and say these words and then walk away. And that's what it was. And it didn't work. I didn't like it. It was a choice and it was a risk. And I think it was a miss. Like, I think it had the potential to be like, hey, here's a really interesting thing. There's a reason why actors are actors.
Yeah, a lot of the dialogue almost came off as like narration. like being narrated by hobo number one, even though it was like they were being shown like speaking,
narrated by hobo number one.
Yeah.
And it felt documentary, but not, which was wrong. Like,
and that's all. I think that's what I meant by that, because it did really feel interviewee. Like, I'm going off on this long dialogue.
And it's acting out a documentary that doesn't have anything to do with anything. Like, there was no purpose or point to any of it all. To me, there was just too much of a gap there. Like, if you went all real people in that situation, I think it would have been a slam dunk, home run, touchdown, whatever you want to say. There were parts of it that were interesting within those stories, and there were some real moments that came out of that. The guy talking about why he was putting people together and teaching them about the nomad life and those kinds of things, because his son had died. His son had committed suicide. Like, it's a real moment that they captured. Like, that really works.
Mm-hmm.
But that comes at the end, an hour and a half into just a bunch of people doing laundry. And then Frances McDormand looking sad next to them, and they just look normal. And you're like, there's a big difference. There's a disconnect. Here. And it just doesn't fit. And that was my big dislike.
Even scenes like that were so sparse, or
most of them were just Frances McDormand doing laundry. Or just Frances McDormand
being a nomad in a van.
Yeah.
That is, what you were saying, it's a very big dislike, because this movie just is. It just is. It's not that I don't like it, and it's not that I do like it. I don't have feelings about it. I watched it. I'm going to completely forget it in a month or a week from now. And it just, I think there could have been potential with this if they actually had a story behind it. But there's, as you mentioned, there's a disconnect between real actors and the real people, whether or not they're actual nomads or if they're just someone that they quickly grabbed from a laundromat and said, hey, star in this movie. I don't know. But it's a big disconnect. And I do agree with the idea, either you have all actors playing in this or you have all non-actors playing it and make it more of a documentary.
Or ask them what their story is, find out about them. I mean, that's what the kind of the point at the end of it is I'll see you down the road, right? Like, there's no final goodbyes. We'll see you down the road.
It was all
we don't know anything about you. It's like, oh, that's a face I remember from 3 years ago.
Yeah, it was all the non-actors teaching the actor how to be a nomad.
And they just kind of, I think, filmed it while it happened. So
I'll say this as like a last dislike, and it's just more of like an observation. I felt that the nomad group with the dude felt like a cult, where he's converting people and he's telling them and sharing his wisdom and lifestyle. And
it felt more like this guy had a YouTube channel and this was his convention. Like, instead of going to PAX, you go to HoboCon. It's like
Nomadic Life Con.
Yeah.
Just go to a random desert in the middle of Nevada and you'll find a group of 50 people that you can preach your teachings to.
It also didn't really feel like it was all that organized. It was like, hey, these are the coordinates we're going to meet at. Let's all just show up and kind of hang out, and then we'll go our separate ways.
Yeah.
We'll swap some stories. We'll swap some advice. I don't know.
I don't think he was asking for donations or make a lifelong commitment to him.
Any other dislikes now that we're,
Like, the shots just seem flat. Like throughout the entire movie. Like, it almost felt like they were just recording it with like their phone or just some whatever camera. Like, it didn't seem like, and it really all comes down to the color. Like, nothing pops. Everything is really like low contrast. Nothing stands out. Like, it just.
Well, and even when it was there, like I can't remember when or what shot it was, but it really did seem like they just took the slider and just dragged it to the blue a little bit. Like it wasn't like, oh, let's add more blue to the shadows, or let's do these kind. Let's
A proper
add
color
more
grade.
contrast. Let's pull some of the shadows down or the blacks down or anything like that. It was just overall one solid filter over everything that just kind of made it all blue. And it was like, well, it's supposed to feel like winter now. And it's like, yeah, but your snow looks blue, not white. Like, just add that to the shadows or to the to the blacks and not the whites or anything like that. And it's just like, I don't know, like it was noticeable was the weird thing. So I'm glad it wasn't just me that was kind of like, yeah, this just didn't really stand. Like I wanted to like these shots, but it just kind of felt unfinished.
Yeah, it seemed really like raw in the footage.
Yeah,
like there wasn't a lot
every
of
time
processing done to it,
or contrast, or yeah. And then so that kind of that same point what I did also make earlier is anytime there was a really cool shot that I was like, all right, I want to spend some time here and just see this moment, it would just cut back to her sitting there looking grumpy. Or just sitting there looking, and you're just kind of like, can we go just back a bit? Like, let's just enjoy the scenery. Like, that seems like 95% of what the point you're trying to make is with this nomadic life is you can be out in nature. Let's enjoy nature a bit.
No, I mean, I agree. Because, like I mentioned earlier, I liked the beauty of the shots, but I do agree that it sucks they didn't hold longer on them.
So going into changes, as that is the whole point of this podcast, I would change just the actors. I would pull the actors out and just keep it as real
So
people
you
and just tell
you
those
would
real
have
stories.
gone the real people route
The real
instead of
people
all
route.
actor route.
That would have been more interesting to me. Seeing actors go through these kinds of things just feels fake.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think it would be more interesting to say, hey, these are real people who were really affected by this. This is the choice that they made. Let's go through a year in their life and just follow them through that, rather than here's, fantastic actors who are masters at their craft next to real people being real people. And it's like, they're both interesting, but
not together.
Not together, right? It's not a chocolate and peanut butter kind of a situation. It's
But wouldn't it be kind of weird to be the real person and you've got like a dude with a camera just like also in your van with you like all the time?
I mean, the pooping scene might have been a little bit more awkward, maybe, but I don't know.
Maybe he's used to it. I mean, you don't know what goes on in a nomad life, so maybe he's used to it.
Maybe they were already filming it.
Just sign a waiver.
Sign a waiver.
But then I don't know. Maybe that would feel exploitive of the people. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you that, but I think that choice.
Yeah, because we never delve into like the personal bubbles of any of the real people.
Anybody, yeah. Feathers, what would you change?
The movie. No, I would change it to actually have a story behind it. It just felt very, I wouldn't say nonsense, but it just felt like you were having, I can't think of the type of conversation, but the kind of conversations you have with people where you say, hey, how's it going? And they're like, good. And then you say, hey, they'll ask you, how's it going with you? And you say, good. And then that's it.
Yeah.
It's like
and that's it.
Yeah, it's just like a nonsense conversation. And that's what this movie felt like. There was like no conflict. There was no backstories to why these characters there was no fleshed out backstories to these characters of why they were in the nomad life. What caused them to just give up living under a house and, start living in a van or an RV or whatever. Because you do kind of get a little bit of a backstory with McDormand's character where she just didn't want, I guess she didn't, I don't know if it's exactly explained this way, but she just didn't want to live in the same house that she lived with her husband.
I feel like he got it more from the one guy than from her character.
Oh, either way. But that's my point, is like it's kind of there, but it's not fully fleshed out. There's nothing. It's just nonsense.
I just realized what the lesson of this movie is. Be careful of being nice to people in Nevada, because they will become your best friends whether you want them to or not. You'll never be rid of these people.
They'll follow you around.
They'll follow you everywhere. If you have hey, how's the weather kind of conversations with some stranger you meet at a pit stop in Nevada, you're now part of the nomad life.
You are now part of it. It just
fastest spreading sect in the U.S.
Oh my gosh, I have such a comment for that. But it just felt very nonsense, where there's just nothing to it. And like I said, it's going to be a movie that I'm very much going to forget. I might remember like maybe a scene here or there, but at the end of the day, I don't
remember the scenes.
The only scene that I'll probably now remember is Frances McDormand shitting in a van, because of the waiver situation that Nugget brought up.
Here's the thing. She was wealthy enough to have a 5-gallon bucket, not the 3-gallon bucket from the lady who lived in a Prius.
And apparently she didn't have bad knees, so.
I also like how the great epiphany of here's how you live in van life. You're all going to need a bucket. Okay, great.
And they all needed a class
buckets
on
useful
it.
all the time. Like I don't need to shit in a bucket, but I find buckets useful all the time.
That's what I would change, is actually build a story. Have a story, because otherwise there's not much interest to it. You just watch it and you leave thinking, okay. And it's like you have a nonsense conversation with someone else. You learn nothing, you gain nothing, and there's
walk away
nothing.
from the conversation and you don't remember the person.
You don't remember the person. Or you remember the person, but you remember nothing about what you just had a conversation about. Because you had no conversation. That's where I'm at, and that's what's most frustrating for me about this, is there doesn't seem to be a story. It's just nonsense.
So Nugget, aside from the color grading, is there anything else you would change?
Yeah, and it's kind of just to piggyback off what Feathers said. The main thing is like, I feel like it would really help if like they would establish kind of her as a character in the beginning a little better. Like we've kind of talked about, like where more than just the town went bust and she was in the town and like that's it. Like it would be good to know a little more about her, and the reasons like why she's running, why she's chosen to do this, like, or why she keeps doing it. I feel like they leave a lot of that open to just your interpretation, which falls flat for me. And then I would prefer a better ending than just
stopping.
Well, it almost like they were going to like end it. Like I thought she was going to go commit suicide, walking out the back of the door.
Yeah.
That's what I thought was happening. And then it's like, nope.
Yeah.
She takes off in the van. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Like, I would have preferred the suicide ending better than the van ending.
Yeah.
At least I would have closure.
After the movie we've been through.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the biggest thing I think that we all would change is you look at a lot of things. Like, you don't explore any of these things. Explore any one of these things. Pick one of these paths that you look at and just go explore them. But you don't.
And I think from an artistic standpoint, like if they were trying to capture the nomadic lifestyle in a movie, like if a movie could become a nomad, this is what it would look like. I think exactly. Like in the way it was presented and everything. So it's a terrible movie. I don't recommend nomad movies. And I'd agree with what you said earlier. Like, 'cause I feel like it was a big miss not exploring the real characters more. Because I think their stories and why they live the nomadic life, like understanding who they are as people, like to me, I feel like that's a more interesting story.
If I had seen this movie in a theater, I would have walked out. I have never walked out of a film. I would have stopped this movie if we weren't doing this podcast. And even then, I heavily considered just stopping it and being like, I've got enough to talk about this movie. But I kept thinking something was going to happen. So
I've walked out of one movie.
I think I would have too much pride in myself to not walk out of a movie. I have yet to walk out of one So I think that even watching this in a theater, I'd have been like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't walk out of this. I would struggle, but
I watched this on Hulu and I almost stopped it. I had to prevent myself from stopping it. It was about an hour into it. I was like, I'm going to be done. No, there's still. I actually need to do this.
I actually started watching it. I had to.
I'm stuck here for another hour.
And I'm like, oh, I got to go do something else. And I felt like I was really close to the end. And then I checked it and I'm like, oh, I'm halfway through it.
Yep.
That's exactly where I was at too. I was thinking that I was closer. I thought I was closer to the end of this. I checked the time and I was like, I still have a freaking hour left. Like, how is that possible?
Yep. We all had that exact same situation. So there's at least one thing the monkey fighters can agree on.
Is that this
halfway through that movie, you'll want to stop this movie. So. And actually, on that note, we're going to wrap this one up now.
Yes.
Don't see Nomadland, but if you do, tell us your comments down below. Explain to us why this is the greatest movie ever.
What are we missing?
What?
Please enlighten us.
Or you remember when YouTube used to let you do like video replies? They don't anymore, but do that and let us know. Like, write your video essay about how fantastic Nomadland is. Because I'll argue, if you want to see a good Frances McDormand movie, go see any other Frances McDormand movie. We'll catch you guys in the next one. Adios.
See ya.